All right, welcome back, guys. So, as mentioned, we're getting into volume 5 of the Maître Neteru, Keys to Health and Longevity. These are all under the studies of Ra'um Nefer Amen. If you are just tuning in, I'm reading this book from him verbatim. A very amazing book, an amazing man. So, in chapter 6, we're going to get into the Kemetic framework of being. And one of the greatest accomplishments of ancient non-Western cultures is the understanding that thinking about complex subjects must be carried out with an aid of organic framework. By a framework is meant a schematic diagram of the whole that is under investigation and the parts that compose it. In this matter, the hierarchical, supplementary, complementary, and sequential relationships between the parts can be clearly understood. Every science and knowledge discipline requires an accurate nomenclature and classification system. This can only be achieved with the existence of a framework. Examples of these frameworks are the Pa'u Neteru of ancient Egypt, the Tree of Life of the Kabbalists, the 5 Elements scheme of Taoism, the Tibetan Wheel of the Law, and so on. For us to engage in an accurate dialogue about spiritual healing and anything pertaining to men, we must have a schematic diagram that serves as a framework of man's being. Man's being, self, and spirit. The first step towards the understanding of the science of spiritual healing is the establishment of the term that denotes the entirety of man's makeup. I have established my own proprietary definition of common English words for use in this work, which I implore the reader to adhere to faithfully. Success in this application of the practical instructions and meditations given in this book depend greatly on compliance with this rule. Strict adherence to the use of these words as defined in this book will reveal the sources of the confusion and failures that beset the spiritual and psychological disciplines of the world. We have been habituated by Western culture to use the word self to denote all that pertains to who and what we are. In this work, it is of the dire importance to reserve the word self for those aspects of our makeup that pertain to man's identity. Being. The totality of who and what man is will, in this book, of all of Dr. Ra'um Nefer Amen's teachings, be denoted by the word being. The self and the spirit division of being. Man's being is composed of 2 major divisions, the self and the spirit. Reason begs the question that if the self is in a separate category from the spirit, is not spirit then not self? You will most likely be aware of the very popular statement to the effect that man is not the physical body, he is a spirit. Well, this is a falsehood that has been accepted by almost everyone, including men of the stature of sages and men of wisdom. We will see how and why the ignorance of the fact that the spirit is not self, even though it is a part of man's being and a major impediment to the realization of divinity with its attendant benefit, spiritual healing, guaranteed success, spiritual powers, and so on. The dual composition of man's being conforms to a law that operates in all dimensions of reality. All units are composed of two major complementary halves. Since the two cannot carry out their prospective functions in service of the whole without each other, they are therefore independent on each other. Now, to further our understanding of the matter, we will consider the subject from Kemetic spiritual tradition. The self is represented by a hieroglyph of an eye associated with a seat. The graphic metaphor is easily to understand. It states that the attribute of the self is consciousness, which is represented by its chief form, seeing the eye. So let's say, acidly logical, the two aspects of being are opposite in qualities to each other in a complementary manner. If the self is the seer, or that which is consciousness itself, then the spirit is the seen, or that which is the object of consciousness and is devoid of consciousness. So once again, you will come to learn, if you have not yet, that it is widely believed that the spirit and the mind are endowed with consciousness. This falsehood is a great impediment to the understanding and the practice of spiritual science. Your ability to implement the teachings in this book to heal your person and others greatly depend on you having your facts straight. So you will learn that the ability to master your spirit depends on where to place your consciousness. We must note that since the spirit is what it is seen, it must be the material side of being. So what is seen, perceived, is matter shaped into forms, thoughts, and physical things. The will and energy divisions of being. If we recall that the word self is reserved for what pertains to our identity, in your being, actions that you can take credit and ownership of are acts that proceed from your will. So yet, as you know very well, there are many involuntary things going on within your being. And since you did not initiate these or have direct control, which is your will, over them, they proceed from the not-self side of being. These are the energy reflexes and involuntary and autonomous events that take place in your being. They belong to the spirit side of being. So let's note that if energy and matter are attributes of the spirit, then it's opposite. And self is devoid of energy and matter. The dual nature of being can be summarized as follows. Two major components of being. Now I'm looking at self and spirit. And the two major components of being under self are consciousness or will, voluntary, directed, seer, not seen. And the two major components of being self and spirit. Under spirit lies matter and energy, involuntary, autonomous, seen. The spiritual framework and the brain. The brains, as said earlier, are not the source of the behaviors that are associated with them. They are the vehicles through which the behaviors are programmed. Western scholars are ignorant of this reality as a result of their entrenched adherence to the belief that the inert molecules created life and intelligence. The various divisions of man's brain are the vehicles for the expression of the two major divisions of her being. Expression of man's being through the brain. So under aspects of being, we have self, which is a consciousness or the will, the lower spirit or automatism or self-bridge to spirit. And under the brain component, we have the frontal lobe, the limbic and reptilian, and the cortex. Again, those are expressions of man's being through the brain. So this framework is an extremely useful tool for understanding the mind-body relationship. For example, it explains immediately why very emotional persons have difficulty overcoming negative and destructive behavior. The cortex, which is the bridge between the will to change and the mammalian brain, has been damaged by continuous emotional indulgence. It teaches that unless you remove agents that impair the frontal lobe, such as nicotine, alcohol, and recreational drugs, you will find it very difficult or even impossible to attain to the realization of the divine aspects of self. So let's return to the understanding that to heal our persons spiritually, we must learn to use our spirits. Now, how can we do so if we do not have a clear understanding of what it is and how it functions? You may have heard of the spiritual cultivation of detachment. Now you can begin to get a clear picture of what is being detached from what. Detachment is the separation by the self, you, from the lower spirit, yet it is not a separation in the sense of creating a state of alienation, given that the two aspects of being must work together for the benefit of your being. Okay. Now, detachment is not a goal in itself. It is a temporary separation of yourself from your lower spirit for the purpose of centering the self in itself in order to fulfill its role appropriately. So the problem is that the seer, you, identifies with the seeing. The various aspects and manifestations of the lower part of the spirit, mind, and emotion, and therefore loses control over it and of life. So that which must follow becomes the leader. So momentarily jump ahead, and a clear example of this is seen in man's identification with his emotions or sensual cravings, which are expressions of the lower spirit and is therefore controlled by them. The divisions of the spirit. The majority of authors of books on spirituality have created a great deal of confusion by their ignorance of the division of the spirit. The spirit is a very complex body that is composed of many subsystems and faculties, very much like the physical body, which latter is modeled after the former in many respects. By far the best understanding of the components of the spirit is found in Kemetic spiritual system. Man's spirit is made up of 7 bodies that house the main faculties of his or her being, and there are 11 in all. The 7 bodies of divisions of the spirit are the Ba, Ku, Shakim, Ab, Shahu, Kabit, and Kap. Before detailing them, let's take note that the establishment of a framework to enable clear thinking about the components of man's being is exactly the same as has been done in Western psychology. So according to it, man's being is composed of the ego, alter ego, ID, conscious mind, subconscious mind, and the physical body. In the division of man's being into these parts that enable psychologists to express their theories and ideas concerning man's behavior. So I'm looking at a chart, and again, we spoke about the man having 7 bodies and the divisions of the spirit. So the divisions, again, we have the Ba, and the Ba, its function is the vehicle that houses the faculty through which the union with God and all is experienced, establishing consciousness, the self, and will. Now here is the final goal of spiritual training and the beginning of man's life as a fully developed being. Ku. Ku's function is the vehicle that houses the faculty through which man receives direct guidance, wisdom from God. The Metu Neter, word of God, is received here. Shekem. Its function is the vehicle that houses the faculty that allows man to share in God's omnipotent power. Ab. The function is the vehicle that houses the faculties that enable abstract thinking and hence understanding of moral principles and laws. Sha'u. Function is the vehicle that houses the faculties that enable concrete thinking. Its faculties also have the function of controlling and directing the life force and of creating the self-image or ego. Kahabit. Function is the vehicle of the life force, which is the life of the physical body. It is therefore in charge of our philosophical functions. It exerts a direct control over the social affairs of men, and it is the psychic force that attracts the resources and challenges of life. Okay? And it is also called the animal spirit, and as such, it is the source of emotions, sensuality, and instinctive guidance. The Kahabit is known in Chinese life science as the Qi, the Shi, and in Hinduism as the Kundalini. It is the soul of the Judeo-Christian religion. The Kahab function is the physical body of men. So Ra Nefer Roman goes on to say that you must remember that we are here learning a science. The preceding schematic must be thoroughly memorized as it is essential for mastering the principles of spirituality and their application to the various practices for spiritual healing. Divisions of the spirit and the brain. The divisions of the spirit correlate to the various aspects of the brain. The divisions of the spirit, Ba, Ku, and Shekem, the parts of the brain that Ba, Ku, and Shekem are related to, or the aspects correlate, is the frontal lobe. The Ab and Sha'u spirit correlate to the cerebral cortex. The Kahabit and the Kahab parts of the brain correlate to the mammalian and the reptilian. This framework has extremely far-reaching applications. It allows us to understand many yogic meditations and Qigong practices and doctrines. At a glance, we can understand the mechanism involved in a Takam yogic practice for the development of the will and reasoning. It involves crossing the eye while looking at one's forehead and concentrating one's attention there. This increases the flow of blood to the frontal lobe and raises thus its level of functioning. So try it as you breathe rhythmically while thinking of being at peace and smiling in a situation in which you are in the habit of getting very upset. You will find that your will to be at peace will be automatically imposed on the mammalian brain. This will happen right away unless your cortex, the bridge between you, which is the will, and your limbic brain is impaired by drugs or chronic emoting. Now we can better appreciate the need for understanding and biochemic connection to spirituality and mental and emotional well-being. Applications of the knowledge of the division of the spirit. All right, so under the applications of knowledge of the division of the spirit, We're going to go into have a very more close examination of the chromatic framework of the being and how it reveals that the consciousness of most people resides in these three lower divisions of the spirit, which is the Sha'u, or concrete lower mind, the Kahabit, or animal spirit, and the Kahab, or the physical body. Okay, and there's also a partial development of the abstract mind. So I'm looking at a chart right now, and the division of spirit, again, we spoke about that, and those are the Ba'ku Shakim, the Ab, the Sha'u, Kabit, animal spirit. I will put this chart up on my webpage so you guys can view it on my YouTube and kind of get a more of a clear understanding if you don't have the book on how the chart looks and how the 7 divisions of men are in the men's body and how that chromatic framework works with us. So divisions of the part of the brain program, the spirit, again, we spoke about the spirit, which is, again, the Ba, Ku, Shakim, Ab, Sha'u, Kabit, and Kahab. Those are the 7 bodies of men. The brain that is affected through those, the Ba, Ku, Shakim, frontal lobe, program state, not yet. The Ab is the frontal cortex lobe, program state, partially. The Sha'u, part of the brain, cortex, program state, partially. The Kabit, animal spirit, part of the brain, mammalian and reptilian, yes, those are fully programmed. And that's why it's important to understand the men as he's still in the water, trying to get out the water in a way. I just kind of like describe that as him getting himself out of that bucket, or crabs in the bucket, or climbing out, breaking free, and understanding that he has 7 bodies to work with. And in order for him to reach his highest spirit, he has to understand who he is and work more with that frontal lobe and the cerebral cortex. So we must break with these false teachings that the brain creates the way we think and behave. Now, it must be fully understood that it is a vehicle through which nature programs behavior to guide creatures on earth. This is the Netaru divine intelligence. But nature only programs the Kahabit, which is the animal spirit, and the lower third of the Sha'u. The rest must be done by you, men. So man is in charge of the completion of his development, evolution or perfection. Errors and programming results in illness. A compelling feedback mechanism, a major cause of illness, is the commission of errors that are due to the lack of guidance in the proper use of these lower spiritual faculties. Now, most people are ignorant of the fact that the true source of guidance in life comes from within. Where and how did animals learn to create their social order? Where and how did bees and ants and beavers and so on learn to create their dwellings? Instincts, we say, but what are they? Are they not sources of their inner guidance? We must take note of the fact that the lower a species is on the scale of complex biological organization, the less it is needed for education. Not evolution, the scale, okay? So if any at all, snakes, fish, amphibians, insects, and so on are born with all the wit needed for survival. They are born ready to recognize threats, to seek protective shelter, to defend themselves, to identify their food, to identify their habitat, and so on. Further up on the scale, we find mammals that are ready to walk and move with the group in a few hours after birth, and are ready for survival after a few months of guidance from the parents. But who taught the parents that they should teach their offsprings, and how? Again, the guidance comes from within. At the point on the scale to the far extreme opposite, the ready born, we find men. He knows not what to eat, has to be taught what is dangerous to his existence, how to get away from things that are dangerous to his existence, like drugs, junk food, etc., has to be taken care of for about 2 decades of his life, and we can go on and on and on. Now, in fact, it takes about 30 years for the frontal lobe, which is his most important survival tool, to reach full development, and another 10 years before it can be fully trusted. So what accounts for the difference between the lower species and man? What we call instincts is guidance from the animal spirit. And since man is destined to be a divine being, the animal influence in his being is downgraded to the point of providing a minimal amount of guidance during the infancy period of his or her life. So yet, the animal spirit has enough power to create a great deal of harm if it is not reprogrammed to function in harmony with the higher faculties of the spirit, okay? The lower species are lacking in higher brain functions because they have all the guidance they need from within. Man is lacking in instinctive guidance to enable her or him to develop the higher sources of inner guidance. Most people do not know that learning and guidance must come from within because of culture that has come to dominate the world. Learning everything from the outside is the entrenched way in the world for the past 2,000 years. Nobody bothers to ask, how did the first person learn to create an alphabet, number, mathematics, the laws of physics, etc.? And where else but from within? Can you think of another source? It should also be clear that the inner source of higher learning cannot come from the animal instinctive spirit, which is why it has been claimed by the sages that the foundation establishing teachings originated from a divine source. Proper guidance is essential to a good life. As Ra'um Nephron Men goes on to say, this is why all animals live in harmony with their environment and with members of their species. Lions hunt gazelles without endangering the gazelle species, and you'll have never and will never see a lion throw a tantrum and act all stressed out because it failed to catch its meal. Again, for the past couple of days, but men will, simply because he is lacking in guidance from below, that animal spear, and from above, which is the divine spear, Now, the problem was supposed to be remedied by the mind. So take note that the framework positioned the mind between the divine divisions of the spirit and the animal spirit, okay? So divine divisions of the spirit, the Ba, the Ku, Shakim. The mind mental divisions of the spirit, the bridge, the Ab, Shaul. The animal spirit, the Kabit, Kahab. Now you see that chart on my webpage, on the YouTube channel, and it says the 3 stages of men, and it speaks about a man and his 3 divisional stages. And I will be adding that on today, another video. I haven't done a video in a while, kind of like getting us out of that reptilian state of thinking, so we can understand how we evolved, how we are still evolving, and how the man evolves on its own. Okay. Out of that mammal or reptilian state of mind, because we are humans, we're not reptilians. We have the likenesses in Genesis 1:26-27 would say of God, but we are not reptilians or mammals. We are humans, and that's where most evolution and the Big Bang Theory had it confused on how the man evolves. So let's go on and, as Ra'um Nephron Men breaks this down for us, okay? So in that same manner that animals are not responsible for the things they know, what and how to do, so it is with the first set of men that received the higher knowledge that served as the foundation for civilization. The guidance came from a divine source. The information came from Ku division of the spirit. The knowledge of how the man the knowledge of how the mind of a man was to be cultivated in order to allow for the communication between the divine spirit and the animal spirit was fully developed in ancient Egypt and lost with the destruction of its civilization. Yes, as all things are born and die and reincarnate, we are now experiencing the renaissance of Kemetic spirituality. For the past 2,500 years, a set of wrong ideas have been programmed into the minds of people, and it has led to the alienation of man from both the higher and the lower divisions of his spirit. This is the reason that illness is running rampant in man's world. Scientists love to conduct medical research on animals to learn how to heal man, yet they are totally oblivious of the fact that in their natural habitat, animals are virtually free of the illness that are rampaging through the world of men. The reason is that they respond correctly to the challenges of life because of their inner guidance. The healing of man, then, must be based on a system that fixes her mind to establish the proper the proper relation to the higher and lower parts of the spirit and the brain to enable men the proper responses to the challenges in his or her life. Life is not stressful. Stress is an ignorant response to life's challenges, which are not only unavoidable, but necessary for the development of men's faculties. This is the reason why such mental healing methods that are centered on the visualization of an organ functioning as it should, or of the person being free of the illness, have scored minor and limited success. Methods such as these, which form the core of most mental healing systems, do not go to the core of the forces that are responsible for the illness, as we will see in the next chapter. So, careful reflection on the Kemetic framework of being will reveal that people are primarily involved in a growth process that is taking consciousness on a journey from the animal vehicle to the mental vehicles to the spiritual vehicles. Okay? Health and well-being, therefore, will not and cannot be obtained until man has elevated his consciousness to the higher parts of his or her being. So please know that in the same matter that we have no input into our physical and mental growth, we have no input into our spiritual growth, and most people believe that their involvement in spiritual pursuits is a matter of choice. Now, you will learn in the next chapter of the forces that are driving your consciousness to the higher centers of the spirit. In the same manner that you will suffer problems if the well-being of your physical body was neglected, and if you did not receive adequate input into the development of mental skills, you will suffer from neglecting to cooperate with imperative that are driving you to manifest a higher spirituality. Illness is one of the means through which men will be forced to turn to the spiritual life, as most measures to deal with the host of ills through material means will fail to achieve their goals. The point that is being made here is that people in the world with the conception of the ancient Egyptians have not been given a correct knowledge of self. We will see in later chapters how this leads to a great deal of illness. Now, I am sure that you have met a number of persons that have become ill by anxiety generated by a fruitless search for themselves. The problem with the Western definition of ego is that they confuse the self with the self-image. Now, early in this chapter, we learned that the self is devoid of energy and matter, remember? And it is thus incapable of experiencing emotions and sensations. So therefore, it cannot. And therefore, manifesting these kind of feelings of low self-esteem and ego, maniacally emotions, and so on. The source of all behavior that is characteristic of a person and is therefore tied into his identity is the self-image, the Ka, in the ancient Egyptian system. Now, we must take note of the fact that none of the dominant institutions in the Western world has taken on the role of systematically and methodologically providing people with the knowledge of self, of the spirit, and the know how to build a healthy and viable self-image. Everyone is left to fend for herself in these matters, and the result is that the majority of people have created for themselves self-image that are the main sources of the stress reactions that lead to illness or the failure to heal. Self-images are built primarily out of information from within, and the main source of inner guidance in the majority of people is the weak and dysfunctional animal spirit in men. In building a self-image, the majority of people identify with their emotional and sensual animal spirit, propensities, and capabilities. So not only do their feelings tell them who they are, they also become the standard for what is right, for honesty, for what they want, and so on. So we will later see how this contributes to the majority of cases of ill health in the world. Health, on the other hand, can only come ultimately by a self-image that is based on the divine attributes of men, and we will explore this in its entirety in future chapters. Self-image and the spiritual and framework. We spoke about this earlier, and as I mentioned, I'm going to put this chart up on my YouTube, so that would be under Junanu Cozy by You if you want to look at the chart as I talk about it. That was presented by Ra'um Nefra Amen. Again, thank you, Ra'um Nefra Amen, for your amazing work. Scholar work, very scholar work. When we speak about this image, the framework, we spoke about it earlier. We have this divine self-image. And in your divine self-image, you are all divisions of that seven embodiment. Your Ba, Ya Ku, Ya Shakim, Ya Ab, Ya Sha'u, Ya Kaibit. When we look at the divine self-image, that's all of them embodied together. The Ba, Ku, Shakim, and the Ab, with the exception of the Ab, because the Ab would be the frontal lobe and the cortex, where the Ba, the Ku, the Shakim are all functions of the frontal lobe. When we get into the human self-image, it's only concentrating on just that Sha'u and Kabit, as we spoke about earlier, which is the cortex, the mammalian, and the reptilian. So it gives you like a good, kind of like an image framework of how that breaks and separates itself down from those divisions. So this framework shows us at a glance the brain and corresponding spiritual elements that go into the human and the true divine self, okay? The human self-image is composed of a partial aspect of the brain and spirit and their lowest. The divine self-image encompasses the totality of man's being. This fact, from the standpoint of the brain, is reflected in the reality that more than 50% of man's cortex is composed of brain cell connections that have not been committed to any function, and that is, have not been programmed. So while Western scholars might think that their purpose is to allow men to learn, to make better and improved gadgets, the uncommitted brain structures are for the programming of the higher parts of his being. So no amount of learning of technological wizardry will use even a smidgen of these uncommitted brain areas. So now we're going to speak about the spiritual framework in light of brain's framework, okay? So many of you may be skeptical about the authenticity of the Kemetic spiritual framework of being, and that's okay. But is there really such a reality as a spiritual vehicle where man's union with God takes place? Of course. So is there such a vehicle through which man is able to receive the metanetru, which is the word of God? Definitely. So let's dig into that. So let's begin by noting the fact that bees do not program their brains to enable them to build hives and to manifest a sophisticated society composed of a queen, soldier, bees, and worker bees. Ants do not do the same in addition to manifesting the practice of enslaving other ants to perform the food gathering and storing labor. These creatures with puny brains did not sit around and discuss how to program bees' behavior in order to create a society that maintains better order, a beneficent monarchy than human society. Their brains were programmed by God. Now, in actuality, by a faculty of God that has been programmed for such purpose. So what we have to understand is that the brains of creatures are receptors and storehouses of programs that originate in the spiritual realm. The programs that are stored in the reptilian brain and limbic system originate in the kabit, which is the animal division of the spirit. The programs that are stored in the cerebral cortex and frontal lobe were designed to enable men to receive information from the higher parts of the spirit, the Sha'u, Ab, Shakim, Ku, and Ba. Now, incidentally, according to ancient teachings, there is another brain center located at the top of the head, the crown center, which is supposed to be the brain for the Ba. Now, since science has not yet verified this center, I will be mute for now on this subject. So it matters not, for the simple fact that when you perfect the teachings in this book, you will become aware of it already. And the importance of linking the framework of growth as shown by man's brain with the spiritual framework of being allows us to correlate the spiritual wisdom of ancient Egypt and other wisdom cultures with the findings of contemporary science. The knowledge that the information you need to reprogram your brain and thus heal your person already exists in your divine spirit. So we will remove and prevent the anxiety that comes from not knowing how the process will be accomplished. You will learn that all you have to do is to show the spirit what you want, and as long as you are working at establishing your divine identity and state of being, the spirit will do the rest. And I am a walking testimony of that. So the faculties of the spirit Ra, or the Pa'unetaru of Anu. And in this diagram, we have Atum, and Atum from the breath of the air, Tefnut, Shu, and then we have Haru Kint, Usa in the middle, Nibhit, Uset, Set, all around divisions of Nut in heaven, and then Geb being earth. We go on to look into the Pa'u Netaru, tree of life. and Usa, Tahuti, and Seker, and their placements on the tree. Again, you can see this tree of life, which is called the Pau Netaru of Anu, on the YouTube channel that I have. And again, I'll be illustrating a little bit more, so that way you can see this in a more illustrative view. And then it speaks of the Mayat, Haru Kahuti, and Haru, and their placements as well on the tree of life. Okay. Then we'll get into Het Haru, Sebek, Uset, and Geb, as well as explaining and defining their placements on the tree of life as well. All right, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. We will be jumping into chapter 7, which will be Healing Meditation Framework.